Here's a question that may just stop you in your tracks. What happens to your job, your income, and your country when AI gets smarter than every human on Earth combined? Well, OpenAI just published a policy document trying to answer that very question. And buried on page 9 of a 13-page paper, is the most important sentence in the whole thing. But first, I want to talk about what OpenAI got right, what they glossed over, and how the implications could be bigger and more complex than most people realize. I'm Keith Powell. I led communications for a United Nations tribunal and now work on AI, misinformation, and digital policy. This is Detoxifying Digital. Companies like OpenAI call what I just described superintelligence, AI that can outperform the smartest humans, even when those humans are also using AI. Right now, AI handles tasks that take you minutes. Soon they say it'll handle projects that previously took you months. Now, think about that. Not autocomplete your emails kind of thing. We're talking entire legal briefs, engineering designs, medical diagnoses, done overnight. Their framing is optimistic. They talk about lower costs, scientific breakthroughs, and cures for diseases. And honestly, that part might all be true. And the same way that electricity eventually did lower the cost of manufacturing. But here's what they don't say. Electricity also destroyed entire industries, and the people in those industries didn't automatically land somewhere better. That took decades of political fights. It took labor laws, welfare states, and safety regulations. It wasn't inevitable, it was willed into existence. And OpenAI knows this. They even cite it directly, which makes what's come next even more interesting. Remember how I said that there's a line buried on page 9? Well, here it is. AI will reshape how work is performed, how decisions are made, how organizations operate, and how states interact. That's not a technological prediction. That's a warning. And it's on page 9 of a 13-page document. I would have expected them to lead with that. So what's the plan? OpenAI lays out two big categories. Category 1, building an open economy. They want workers to have a formal voice in how AI gets deployed at their companies, not just, here's your new robot colleague. Actually sitting at the table, and that's genuinely good. They want a right to AI, treating AI access like electricity, which is universal and largely affordable, not just for people who can afford a premium subscription. This isn't too far removed from those who see the internet in general as a public good like electricity or access to reliable water. And this is also good. But this requires more infrastructure building at a more fundamental level. The internet still isn't fairly deployed across the globe. The digital divide is still a problem in much of the world, and that's not a criticism of the idea. It's a warning that good intentions aren't infrastructure. They also want to modernize the tax base. As AI replaces labor, the payroll taxes that fund public services, things like pensions, welfare, and social security, those start to dry up. And their fix is to tax capital gains more, tax corporate income more, maybe even tax automated labor. That's a big idea, and expect to fight in every parliament and Congress on the planet and pushback from businesses in most sectors. And then there's the Public Wealth Fund, the idea that every citizen gets a stake in AI-driven growth, even if they've never owned a share in their life. Norway does this with oil revenue. The principle is simple. If AI creates extraordinary wealth, everyone should own a piece of it, not just shareholders. This is also a radical concept and required tremendous political will to implement. The kind that makes it electorally risky in many countries and therefore unlikely, at least in the short or medium term. Category 2, building a resilient society. This is where it gets more serious. They want auditing standards for powerful models. They want companies to report near misses, cases where something almost went wrong, like to a public authority. Like aviation safety reporting system, which has made flying one of the safest things you can do. They want corporate governance that bakes in public accountability, and perhaps most crucially, they want international cooperation, a kind of global safety network modeled on the multilateral institutions we already use for nuclear safety, financial regulations, and public health. That last part matters enormously because right now the rules are largely being written in a precious few countries and by a handful of companies for technology that affects everyone. Here's the tension. OpenAI is the company proposing all of this regulation, and OpenAI is also one of the companies that would be regulated. The document even admits it, that there's a risk that economy gains could concentrate within a small number of firms like OpenAI. They said that about themselves in their own document. Is this genuinely altruistic, a PR move, an attempt to write the rules before someone else does? And it's probably all three. That's how corporate lobbying works everywhere. And knowing that doesn't make the ideas wrong, it just means you should read the fine print. We have heard in the past about AI companies asking to be regulated, but documents such as this may be part of a way to create the rules that they will have to live with in a way that will not cause too much friction with their current shareholders. Now, having said all this document does have some gaps. On worker displacement, they suggest pathways into the care economy, things like childcare, elder care, or community services. That robots aside, those jobs are hard to automate, so let's retrain people for them. And that may be a hard sell, especially for older workers. Try telling a 52-year-old logistics manager to retrain as a care worker is not really a policy. And it ignores the fact that care work itself is chronically underpaid and undervalued in almost every country on earth. On AI and government, they want clear rules for how governments can use AI. Great. But that opens a can of worms that the document doesn't really address. And it's a question that would be answered very differently depending on whether your government is a liberal democracy, an authoritarian state, or somewhere in between. The document says the transition to superintelligence is not a distant possibility, it is already underway. And historically, the frameworks that protected people during technological upheaval, labor protections, social safety nets, antitrust rules, these took decades to build. We may not have that much time to sort all this out before superintelligence arrives. The choices made in the next few years will, as the document put it, shape how its benefits and risks are distributed for decades to come. And most of those choices are currently being made by a very small number of people in a very small number of places. So, what now? Well, this document is genuinely more thoughtful than most corporate policy papers. It acknowledges real risks, proposes big ideas, and is surprisingly honest about the conflicts of interest involved. But it's also a 13-page conversation starter from a company with billions of dollars riding on the outcome. Every proposal in here is a negotiating position as much as it is a policy idea. The question isn't whether OpenAI's ideas are good or bad. The question is, who else is in the room? Because right now, the people writing the rules for the most transformative technology in human history are mostly the people who built that technology. And if history tells us anything, from the railways to the banks to the internet, that's exactly when everyone else needs to be paying attention. If you want to read the document yourself, I'll link it below. And if you've got any thoughts on what we've discussed, especially if you work in a field being affected on this right now, wherever you are in the world, drop them in the comments and please like this video. This is a conversation we should all be having, and I'll be making more videos about this, so please subscribe if you haven't already to be part of it. Thank you for watching.